Early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Over the past 36 hours, the United States and its partners have launched Operation Epic Fury.
War seems like a completely illogical thing. Both sides lose, people die, economies collapse, food shortages follow. So the question is, why hasn't war disappeared from the world? Because today, war is not just conflict. War is a business. Behind every battlefield, there is a massive war industry, weapons, defense contracts, military technology, and global power politics. And the country that built the most powerful war industry in history is the United States of America. For decades, America's military power and global influence have grown alongside this massive defense economy. In many ways, America became the global superpower it is today through wars and through the business built around them.
Die Marxistische-Partei vernichtete, aber mein Freund, ich hab die andere genauso vernichtet. 14, 15 Jahre wahnsinnig handelt. So könnte nicht erwarten, dass einer kommt und in wenigen Wochen oder Monaten das alles wieder gut.
The story begins during World War II, when Adolf Hitler was invading and attacking much of Europe. Surprisingly, at that time, the United States had very little interest in joining the war. America's main focus was trade and economic growth, not global conflict. In fact, the U.S. Army was relatively small, smaller than the military of some European countries, including Portugal. But by 1941, Japan had become a powerful military force in Asia. It had already conquered large parts of China and had taken control of Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The United States began supporting China by supplying weapons and resources. At the same time, Washington tried to restrict Japan's access to vital resources like oil. Japan saw this as a direct threat. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. That attack changed everything, and it pushed the United States into World War II.
Now, the United States was furious. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, America officially declared war on Japan. To defeat Japan, the U.S. needed an enormous military buildup. That meant producing massive amounts of weapons, aircraft, tanks, and ships. The government began encouraging American industries to expand weapons manufacturing. But there was a problem. Most private companies were afraid to invest in military production. Why? Think about it. Imagine the U.S. government gives your company a contract to build aircraft carriers. To do that, you would need millions of workers, massive factories, expensive machines, and huge amounts of raw materials. But what if the war suddenly ended tomorrow? All that investment would collapse overnight. The factories would sit idle, the equipment would become useless, and companies could lose billions of dollars. Because of this risk, many investors were not willing to fund large-scale weapons production. So the U.S. government came up with a solution. It introduced something called guaranteed profit contracts. Under this system, the government guaranteed companies a fixed profit margin on military production. For example, if the guaranteed profit was set at 10%, companies would receive that profit even if the war ended early. Let's say the government asks a company to manufacture 100 aircraft. If the total manufacturing cost is $100 million, the government guarantees to pay that $100 million plus a 10% profit. That means the company would receive $110 million, even if the contract was canceled before completion. In other words, the government protected the companies from financial risk while ensuring they would still make money. For American businesses, this was a jackpot deal. It triggered an enormous transformation in the American economy, the beginning of what many call the American war machine and the rise of America's military-industrial power. Automobile companies like Ford, which once focused on building cars, began producing B-24 bombers. General Motors started manufacturing tanks and military engines. Boeing expanded aircraft production for the U.S. military. And the United States invested around $2 billion in one of the most secret projects in history, the Manhattan Project, which ultimately created the world's first nuclear bomb.
Few people laughed, few people cried, most people were silent.
When World War II ended, many people believed the fighting was finally over. Soldiers would return home, and military spending would shrink. But the United States now faced a huge problem. By 1945, America had built the most powerful Navy and Air Force in the world. Nearly 40% of the U.S. economy was tied to defense production. So the question was simple. If almost half of your economy depends on war, can you suddenly stop preparing for it? The answer was no. By that time, nearly 13% of American workers were employed in industries that produced military equipment. Millions of jobs depended on defense contracts and weapons manufacturing. The United States had become deeply dependent on the defense industry. And this is where many American politicians began to realize a difficult truth. Weapons gave them power, and war created enormous economic opportunity. But after the war ended, there was another problem. If there was no war, who would buy all these weapons? According to many historians and experts, the answer soon appeared: the Soviet Union. A new geopolitical rivalry began to emerge between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both sides started building massive military power, nuclear weapons, and global alliances. This confrontation became known as the Cold War, a decades-long struggle for global influence that kept the war industry alive even without direct large-scale battles.
A cloud hides the sky. Midway through the 20th century, two superpowers prepared for a conflict which might have ended life on the planet.
The United States responded by promoting capitalism and strongly opposing communism. In 1947, American leaders announced a new policy. The United States would oppose the spread of communism anywhere in the world by any means necessary. During this period, the Soviet Union was often portrayed as the enemy. In movies, news media, and even school textbooks, communism was presented as a global threat that had to be stopped. Then came Vietnam. In 1954, Vietnam was divided into two parts: North Vietnam, which was communist, and South Vietnam, which was supported by the United States and its allies. The U.S. government convinced the American public that protecting South Vietnam from communism was their responsibility. What happened next became one of the most controversial chapters in modern history. By 1972, the United States had deployed around 500,000 American soldiers to Vietnam. Over the course of the war, the U.S. spent between $50 and $90 billion on military operations there. Between 1965 and 1975, the United States dropped roughly 4 million tons of bombs on North Vietnam, making it one of the most heavily bombed regions in history. The goal was to bring stability and stop the spread of communism. But instead of peace, the war brought widespread destruction, suffering, and instability across Vietnam. At the same time, America's defense industry continued to grow. Companies involved in military production saw enormous profits. For example, Bell Helicopter produced more than 16,000 helicopters during the war. The company's profits rose dramatically from about $150 million in the early 1960s to nearly $2 billion later in the decade. In 1968, defense contractor Raytheon earned around $620 million from weapons sales. The war also spread beyond Vietnam. The United States carried out heavy bombing campaigns in Cambodia, believing that North Vietnamese forces were using the country as a hiding place and supply route. The conflict lasted nearly 19 years. In the end, the United States withdrew its forces without achieving its original goals. Vietnam was unified under communist rule, and the war left behind immense destruction and loss on all sides.
President Gerald Ford ordered all U.S. troops and citizens out of the country.
Permit the movement of refugees to the area of their choice.
And on April 29th, Armed Forces Radio began playing White Christmas to signal an evacuation was underway.
Personally, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that the United States of America is being humiliated and is leaving an area that we had come to defend, and we've been defeated.
Did the United States stop after Vietnam? No. Many critics argue that wars also became a way to showcase military technology, almost like a battlefield demonstration, allowing the U.S. defense industry to market its weapons to other countries. After Vietnam, the United States continued to be involved in conflicts around the world. During the 1980s, the U.S. supported Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War, a conflict that lasted for 8 years. Years later, Iraq itself became the target of U.S.-led military intervention. Libya was destabilized during another Western-backed operation. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, the United States launched the War on Terror. U.S. forces entered Afghanistan to eliminate Osama bin Laden and dismantle terrorist networks. American troops remained there for nearly 2 decades. In recent years, the United States has also provided military support to Ukraine in its war against Russia. Across these conflicts, millions of lives were affected. Governments collapsed, and entire regions experienced instability. At the same time, the global defense industry continued to grow. Some analysts describe the War on Terror as one of the largest transfers of wealth into the defense sector in modern history. For example, imagine investing $10,000 in the S&P 500 index in 2001, around the time the Afghanistan war began. By 2021, that investment would have grown to around $61,000. But if that same $10,000 had been invested in major American defense companies, the value could have grown to nearly $100,000 over the same period. For some industries, military conflict drives demand. Weapons need buyers, and wars create markets. This leads to a difficult and uncomfortable question. If war is profitable for powerful industries, will it ever truly disappear? Perhaps that is one of the saddest truths about the modern world. What do you think about this? Share your opinion in the comments.